Welcome back, and thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast, where we make adulting easier by making money easier. This is your host, Lauren, and I'm joined today by Andy. He began investing for the long haul in 1994 at the age of 23. He invested 25 to 40% of his income into growth mutual funds for over 20 years. Over time, he became a multimillionaire, but his net worth was tied up in retirement investments, which are not accessible until you're 59 and a half. That's when Andy began investing in income producing assets. He began acquiring rental properties, peaking at 4 in 2019, and he added additional income streams by buying music rights and loaning money to friends and family. Next, he then added dividend ETFs in 2021. In 2022, he discovered selling options and now makes over $100,000 a year in this niche. Andy formally retired from his engineering job in corporate America at the end of 2023 after replacing his 9 to 5 income while having no debt, including a paid off house. He has multiple sources of income in 5 different niches. Andy has also appeared on Dave Ramsey's Millionaire Hour, as well as the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. Thanks for joining me, Andy.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So our goal for today is to make adulting easier for listeners by discussing a personal finance topic, since managing money is a big part of adulting. So today, Andy, we're going to talk about getting your money right for retirement. And I sent you some questions, and this one's not on it, but
Okay.
I'm gonna throw you this like
Sure.
curveball.
Yeah.
What's with the paid off house?
Paid off house. So that's that is a really good story. And I actually talked about this on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. So I bought a foreclosure in 2014 on auction.com, which and if this airs, this is an important topic that when I got into real estate investing at a pretty serious level, I had a mentor. He was a guy that was in my church life group. We call them life groups. Very successful, multimillionaire young guy. So when I started going into that space, I had somebody looking over my shoulder, and he warned me that houses don't close on auction.com. Well, mine did. And I actually bought it while I was at an Indianapolis Colts football game, and I bought it on my phone, and I told my brother-in-law next to me, I said, I just bought a house for $194,000. And he thought I was joking, but I did. But I had a partner because this was about 2 hours south of me. But anyway, I bought this house. It was worth probably 355,000. Got it for
Wow.
194. We had to put some not much money. Actually, the main money we put into it was doors because the guy who moved out took all the custom doors for some reason. So we had to hire a guy. But long story short, that after the whole deal was done, that partner of mine leased it from me, so I cash flowed it for several years, and he bought it from me outright in 2018. So I walked away with a large sum of money, cash. And I had already bought a couple of rental houses at that point that were cash flowing locally here. And I looked at the market, and the market had shifted. So, you know, that there's typically the 1% rule on rent to buying, and that had shifted on me. So I'm like, I've got this cash. I could buy a couple of rental houses, but it's out of it. The market wasn't right for it. And I had a mortgage on my house. So I had to make a decision. I go, I want to do something with this money. And this is before I really understood dividends and options and other methods to make money. I was more into real estate. So I said, okay, I could just wipe out, a couple thousand a month in a mortgage payment. And that's what I did. So I won't say accidentally got a paid off house, but I just ended up with a good real estate deal with a lot of cash. So just made the decision to pay off the house. Now, do I regret that? No, because I am retired now, I think 5 years after that happened. But to think about what I could do with that much cash now that I have more skills is pretty amazing. But it is what it is. And that's how I got a paid off house.
What was the interest rate on it?
My house, about 2.8%. Yeah. Yeah. In hindsight, yeah, it's like free money. But at the
Right.
time, again, no regrets. Given the situation, I think a lot of people too, given your situation at the time, you make the decisions based on the data you have. I don't regret it, but yeah, 2.8%, it'd be great to have that cash for other things now, but it's good.
Sure. And it sort of depends what your hurdle rate is for like
Mhm.
different projects. The stock market, inflation adjusted over time, there's a little bit of debate. How far back do we go? Which index do we use? But around 8% inflation adjusted,
Mhm.
right? So some people would say if you have any debt lower than that, you shouldn't pay it off and you should put it in the stock market, get your 8%. Or real estate is usually you're getting a higher return than that, which makes sense. It's a little bit riskier, there's a little more work to it, things like that. But there's no hard and fast rule. I do think paying off your house gets a little bit of a bad rap because the rule, quote unquote, for like 3% is like, nah, hold it, whatever. but we're not going to have those 3% loans for a while. So if people are out there and they're sitting on us like 5, 6, 7,
Mm.
7.5% interest rate, might totally be in every situation the best move to make.
Well, I do coach people. I'm not taking any clients now, but I do coach people, and that's a debate I get. And I for some reason higher net worth people tend to be attracted to my coaching, which is fine. And they do have those decisions. I mean, I have a client that's got $600,000 cash, and we had this discussion, and on paper, he's a good financial guy. It makes sense to not pay off his house, but we have the discussion where it's a personal choice. It's a peace of mind thing. So I see the debates on all the social media platforms, and I see both sides of it. It comes down to it's a personal choice. That's all it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just retired.
Hmm.
I'm going to ask you a really vague question here. Like,
Okay,
how much money does someone need to retire?
that's a great question. I think in general, I'll kind of talk about my situation, and I think you have to look at retirement two different ways. You've got traditional retirement, which you could argue is in the 60s. To me, it's 59 and a half, because that's when you can access your IRAs and 401ks, et cetera. And then there's early retirement, which I chose to do at 53 years old. So I'll focus more on the early retirement because it's very different than the traditional retirement. Uh, for me, I first said, okay, I'm going to start accumulating income assets. And that was in 2014 when I bought my first rental house. And then I bought a second rental house and I bought some music royalties. I started accumulating these income assets, and it was working. And I got to the point where I'm looking at my corporate job and looking at what I'm making with my income assets. And I think it was in 2021 they cross paths. Like my path, I won't say passive, but we'll say investment income caught my corporate income, and that there's not enough comfort there at that point. So I continued getting skills and growing, and then it got to about 50%. I was starting to hit about 50% more than I needed to make my ends meet. Now my comfort level was good, and um, and I'll be honest, the last year of my corporate job, even though I loved my company, what I did for 30 years, it got more difficult to go into the office and deal with problems, because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at my investments and they're producing more than I'm making. But I think
Yeah.
to answer that question, I think for people who want to retire early, I think you definitely want to create some income streams. The more passive, the better. But some you can be involved in. Real estate's not completely passive. But you'll get to a point where if you're doing well, they will touch each other. And then you got to decide, what margin do you need? That's important. And what's the security of that margin? Because some of these assets do have risk and they can go down. Like today, as we're recording this, the stock market, I'm glad we're doing this podcast because it's not doing so well. So it's not fun to look at. But so it's a personal choice of how much risk you're willing to take. So let's just use random numbers. Let's say somebody needs 5,000 a month to replace all of their expenses, mortgage, etc. And they're now making, let's say, 6,000, because you got to take taxes in. That would, if somebody asked me a question, I said, there's not enough margin there. You're living on the edge. If something just goes wrong in your investments, you're going to be in trouble or going back to work. So I think it's just, you have to personally look at it and say, what is your comfort zone of margin? And mine was about 50% over what I needed to live with.
I'm so glad you spoke about it in those terms and talk about it with margin, because I don't think people talk about it enough.
Mhm.
I mean, we hear about like 4% rule or whatever, and it's like
Yeah.
you hit that and boom, you are good. And,
Yeah.
let's say, just this isn't happening to me or anything, but let's say your insurance like doubles in a couple of years
Hmm.
on like all of your rental properties. That
Yep.
takes away a lot of that cash flow. So if you don't have
Yep.
the margin, you are going to be in trouble. For listeners, and I could do this math based on your
Okay.
bio, but I'm going to
Okay.
ask you to do it for me.
Okay.
2014, you bought your first rental property.
Yes.
How old were you then?
I was
Okay.
43.
Got it.
And,
Okay.
and the epiphany there was, I had lost my first wife in late 13 to
Oh,
breast
sorry.
cancer. She was 41, and I had an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. So here I am, a
Oh,
single dad with a good corporate career. And fortunately, my late wife's Social Security covered hiring a full time nanny, which was a blessing. So I could continue working my corporate career. But I started thinking, okay, that event made me really ponder how long am I going to work and how involved do I want to be in my kids' lives. And I'll bring this topic up. So I see a lot on social media where people are checking their net worth daily, weekly, quarterly, and they share it, and it's a big thing. In 2007, I became a I call a paper millionaire. So 401ks, IRAs, I became a millionaire at 36 years old. And I had two small children. I had three small children at that time, and one of them had medical challenges, and she's my 18-year-old now. Then my wife got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I had a corporate career that just took off, that took me globally traveling. So from 2007, when I hit that net worth millionaire, to 2014 after she passed, I never checked my net worth. And people find that fascinating. It's because I was so busy with life. I was corporate career, little kids, had life challenges. So my story on that is you don't have to check your net worth all the time. Now, I personally today do check it every 3 months at the end of each quarter, and I only do it to measure as a metric, is what I'm doing working or not working? And if it's not working, then I got to do a deeper dive of what's not working. Do I have to make adjustments? But don't just check net worth all the time. But what happened is after she passed and all the smoke cleared, and I looked at my life, I'm like, I don't want to work till I'm 59 and a half. I've got on paper by then, I think I was over $2 million in my retirement account. And that's where that 59 and a half is a big deal. So I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm 43. I don't really want to work another 6.5 years. I've got to make a pivot. And that's when I bought my first rental house. And it was actually my daughter, who's 18, that I talked about. It was one of her teachers was selling her house, and she mentioned it to me. I said, have you signed anything with a realtor yet? Because I knew her neighborhood and her town, which is west of Indianapolis, was kind of a new hotspot. She goes, I
Huh.
haven't. I go, don't sign anything. And we did a deal. And when I bought that rental house, it was really, really a good entry into that market because I had a built-in tenant. Because she and her husband, who's a firefighter, were building a house, and it was 6 months out. So I said, I'll buy your house now, then you can become a tenant. I think I charged her like $1,100 a month rent. So I had a built-in tenant. And then when her house was done, she moved out, and she actually found me my first tenant there that stayed with me for 5.5 years. So that's how I got into the rental business in 2014, is just life epiphany, really, of I had to do something different if I'm not going to retire before 59 and a half.
Wins all around in that story.
Yeah.
I mean, she got to sell, she didn't have to pay realtor
Oh,
fees.
yeah.
You didn't have to pay realtor fees on your side. She
Yes.
probably needed the cash to build the house, so she got that out ahead of
Yes.
time.
It
I
worked
mean,
out
and
very
then
well.
she found your next tenant. I mean,
Well, even
that's
better than
that's
that,
great.
her husband, who was a fireman who I knew was a handyman. So I knew buying the house that place was rock star because he had fixed everything himself. And actually, when I had some challenges, minor challenges with the property over the next few years, guess who my handyman was? He was, because he
Yep.
previously lived
Heck
there. And
yeah.
I could, and then the dryer went out after 3 years. I called him up, said, "Hey, how old's the dryer?" And they're like, "Oh, it's pretty old." So it was a really good, safe entry into the rental niche that I got into.
Yeah, I'm glad that worked out. Sometimes
Yeah.
I think it's like that first deal makes or breaks everything. If the first deal goes
Yes.
bad, it's like you never
Yep.
buy the second one, even
Yep.
though that could be a almost like a black swan
I
event.
agree. Yeah.
So we kind of touched on this. When you're young, I feel like a lot of people split a lot of hairs very early on of like, how am I going to cash flow for retirement?
Yep.
And I think in some ways, when you're young, you can focus on net worth and
Mhm.
growing it and then sort of readjust it into cash flowing assets
Mhm.
later. Am I wrong there, or does that make any sense?
My whole mentality when I started investing in 94, there were no podcasts or YouTube videos or social media. It was more traditional books and actually cassette tapes. And Warren Buffett obviously was a big name out there. So my mindset when I started investing at 23 was it's for the long term. You buy growth mutual funds were the big thing back then, and S&P index. So there's nothing about cash flow when I was in my 20s and 30s. Like if we wanted cash flow, we started doing side hustles. I remember doing some side hustles in my late 20s. The internet was starting to take off, but that was it. We never thought about dividends or options or rental properties when I was in my 20s. So my mentality was just network, network, net worth until I hit that epiphany in 2014 when I went, okay, I got good net worth, but it doesn't get me retired before 59 and a half. But to answer your question, when people ask me for my advice, I can only give my life experience. I think when you're in your 20s and 30s, to me, you should focus on net worth unless I think it's a dying term, but the fire.
Yeah.
I now say fine. It's the Money Guys podcast is good. They came up and coined fine, which is financial independence next endeavor, which I really like that term because
Yeah.
financial independence is key. I have no problem. Retire early gets everybody fired up in debates of what's retired, but because I retired, but I'm busier now than ever. I mean, because I've got next endeavors that I'm doing. So people think you retire, but you're always running around like because I'm doing things I enjoy that do make money. But anyway, but if you're younger and you do have this desire to retire, say you're 28 years old and you want to retire at 35, I think you do want to build some net worth, but you do have to start looking at building those income streams, whether it's dividends or real estate or whatever uh, niches you want to get into, because it does take time. That's the key. Like in 2014, when I had that eye-opening event, I had zero cash flow anywhere. I had a couple $1 million in an IRA, but I had zero cash flow. And here I am 10 years later, and it's well over six figures, but it took time. It took a lot of time. It took focus. It took effort. You and I were talking about professional athletes, how much work they got to put in. I had some skills, but the work I had to put in of learning over the last 10 years, even though I was a quote unquote millionaire or multimillionaire, was massive. I mean, I was networking, I was watching podcasts like this, I was reading blogs, then became videos, but I still to this day at 53, I'm worth millions of dollars every day. I'm learning. So to answer your question, it's a personal choice, but personally, I think in your early days, especially 20s, you just want to get as much invested as you can in a broad index. And then at some point, you may make that shift to income producing assets, and it's going to be different for different people.
So how far out from retirement do you think the shift should occur?
Well, I can speak from my personal experience. It took me about 10 years to build enough income, but I was still working a corporate career and had kids. So I was busy, but I mean, it depends on people's lifestyles. I mean, I've got a guy, a coach, and he just retired at 50. Well, he has no kids. He was making 400 grand a year. He has no kids. So it was much easier for him to transition than like I still got a kid in college and another going to college. So I've got that part of my plan, but it takes years. It's not fast. Nothing is fast. And even if you have a good plan and you say, okay, I'm looking at this plan, it's going to take 5 years, you better build margin in there because things will go sideways. So that 5 could be 7. And I do see some people and talk to some people that it's faster than what they planned, but it takes time, years and years, I think,
Yep, that makes sense.
unless you win the lottery or sign an NBA contract.
So we heard in your bio that you have basically 5 different
Yeah.
niches that are generating
Hmm.
income now. Do you
Yeah.
think it is important for everyone to diversify their income like that?
Yes, I do, because I'll give you an example. So when COVID hit, uh, the stock market did very bad things. And some of my dividends that were paying their monthly dividend ETFs, they went way down. But one of my niches I'm in, which is a very unique niche, is music royalties that I started getting into. And I get more questions on that than anything I talk about when I do interviews, but it's a whole separate topic. But when COVID hit, my music royalties went up like 50% because everybody
Right.
was stuck at home
Yep.
streaming, and it was unbelievable what we saw happen with that niche, and it really offset the loss in my dividend income. So yeah, and you can't diversify right away. Like as I mentioned, I got into the rental uh, real estate niche because I was comfortable with that. I got a brother that's a real estate investor, and so I got into that, and I discovered music royalties. I'm passionate about music. I'm a musician, so that was a good fit for my personality, and it was a new industry. So I was kind of a guinea pig when that whole platform launched. And then eventually I went into the dividends. I added that, I think 18 or 19, and then I discovered options. So as time went on, I kept adding different things. And again, it goes back to time. And diversification has been very critical to me because I do see a lot of people on social media that have all their eggs in one basket. And there is one particular guy on X that I've become kind of friends with. And I actually posted the other day how much my net income went over the last quarter because I do quarterly net worths, and it was good. Well, his did not do that because all of his eggs are not only in one niche, they're heavy in one stock. I won't say what stock it is, and
Oh,
it's suffering. And
geez.
he and I had some banter, and he just couldn't believe what mine went up. And then when we had a discussion, he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're diversified over lots of different niches and industries, et cetera." But it takes time again. But I do believe in diversification. I kind of come from the old school. Like I said, when I learned this stuff in the 90s, it was kind of Warren Buffett and that whole thing, and they teach diversification.
Yep. So if you had like $1 million or $2 million in your retirement accounts a while
Yes.
back,
Yes.
are you going to have like too much?
I'm going to have way too much. Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly. But it's okay. I mean, I invested really heavy for all those years, and then I was with a company that had an ESOP, and that helped too. That's a whole separate discussion. Most ESOPs have not been successful. I was with one that almost died, and then it got resurrected. But yeah, I tell my wife when we're 59 and a half, because we're within a month of each other, our age. I got remarried at 19. I said, we're just not going to be able. I mean, we can make as much as we want, but taxes are going to be a concern because they're not Roth. But yeah, I'm going to have a lot of money. So I mean, I think it's important too that my kids kind of know where I stand. They're 18, 20, 23, and two at 27. I got 5 kids. Um, so yeah, they got a good future. I mean, we talk about generational wealth. So I'm in a blessed place that I'm going to be able to do that, barring any kind of catastrophic life events. But yeah, it's very it's very heavy. But I told my wife when we're 59 and a half, we're going to be able to have a lot of fun and generosity in terms of tithing or putting kids through college that we don't know. Because I told her if we want to make a seven figure income when we're 60 passively, we will be able to. But it's a good problem to have, and I don't brag about it, but it's very heavy. Well, I've got some notes here. My total net worth, my IRA is 66% of my net worth. Even though I'm diversified, it's just really heavy, and it's just because I was so young and I put so much into it. And had
Yeah.
I known things I know now back then, I would have done some things differently. But it is what it is. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to talk about. And that's something that my husband and I deal with. I think we have like 500 in our retirement accounts
Hmm.
and we're 34 and 31. So we feel like that's probably pretty good.
Hmm.
We realized in our 20s, this is going to be a lot in our
Hmm.
retirement accounts, and then stopped maxing our 401ks
Hmm.
just to get the match. And
Yep.
we kept
Yep.
maxing our Roths. I think we'll probably going to be done with
Hmm.
the backdoor Roths for now.
Yep.
Um, and started transitioning into the brokerage account and the real
Yes.
estate. And then my husband
Correct.
also became, an owner of the engineering firm. And that's a
Yeah.
whole nother wild ride
Okay.
that we're on right
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
So we sort of figured that out early on. So that's why I wanted to ask about
No,
it,
that's
is
good
just
that you did that. Yeah. Yep.
keep an eye on that stuff, guys,
You do.
because it's
Yep.
so easy to just keep doing it.
Mm.
But holy crap, you could
I
end up with
agree. I agree. And then I think there's a term that I read years ago called Coastfire. And if I think
Mhm.
what I read is there is a point in your life, I mean, you could be 25, 35, 40, where you look at your retirement account and, okay, just based on the historic return of the stock market of, say, 8%, that let's say you're 35 years old and you've got X dollars in retirement, you know that, oh my gosh, by the time I'm 59 and a half, that this money is going to be worth 1 million or 1.5 or 2 more than I need, or 3, whatever that number is. And then you can throttle back. You can say, okay, we'll just go to the match, the 401k, or we're just have put anything in it. Maybe we'll start building a brokerage account. But yeah, you being younger than me, you recognize that. I just went like a bulldozer, just throwing as much in there. But it's a good problem to have. But yeah, if you want to
Well, I
retire
think,
young, you can make that pivot.
yeah, well, I was certainly exposed to the fire movement in my
Hmm.
20s, right? Because it certainly existed then. And so once we realized that, that's really when we started transitioning to that. I think there's something different too when you have kids. My husband and I do not have kids. We're not
Hmm.
100% sold
Hmm.
on not having them, but
Yeah. Mm, yeah,
we're heading that way probably.
it'll change
But
your
I think
retirement
that's
plans.
it changes retirement plans. It
Hmm.
also is like, okay, my kids are going to be in school and I kind of like need to be around and my kids are going to be
Hmm.
gone all day for like the next 18 years. It's like maybe I just will kind of stay the course. Maybe I just
Yeah.
will keep working. And so
Hmm.
I think that changes things too.
Hmm.
And going back to something you mentioned earlier
Yep.
too, a lot of the reason when people talk about retirement is being in your 60s is because of the government stepping in at that point
Hmm.
with Social Security, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can start it at 62, you
Hmm.
max at 67, but if you go to 70, it's higher, right? But so there's that portion and then Medicare at 65, right?
I think
I
so.
think
Yep.
that's what my
I'm too
parents are
young for
going
that, but
through.
I think it's, yeah, mid
Yeah,
60s.
my dad just retired, so they're kind of just
Okay.
dealing with all
Yeah.
of this now. And he's 64, but my mom was over 65, so she's got
Uh,
the medic and he's Cobra. I don't know exactly how it's
yep.
going on.
Hmm.
But anyways, so that's a lot of the reason people think of your 60s as your retirement age if you are able to take Social Security and then get your health insurance figured
Hmm.
out. And then 59 and a half is when you can access your IRAs and your
Yeah. Hmm.
401ks without
Hmm.
the 10% withdrawal penalty. So I just wanted to point that out for listeners. What are you doing for health insurance?
Well, great question. I get that question from I got a retirement group of friends where we meet once a month and they're young retirees. And that's a big question. So my wife is a vice president of a credit union, a large credit union, and she absolutely loves what she does. So I offered for her when we started looking at this in 23 about potentially leaving the workforce. I offered that she could retire. I said, "You can retire first. I can go another year around the sun working." Because I mean, even though I was kind of burned out, it was not terrible. I could develop some young engineers. Um, and she said no because she'd just been promoted and got, as a female, she got promoted into a position that was pretty exciting for her based
Nice.
on that world of there is, and that's a whole different topic of men and women salary because I know what she makes, I know what she should be making, but she enjoys her challenge, so she's staying on for at least another year. So I just moved my health insurance to her. Okay, I had my own health insurance, she had her own, so I'm writing her insurance now. So if she does retire, say in 24 or 25 or 26, we know that we're looking at probably 2,000 to 2,500 a month for the kind of coverage we want. And it
Yeah.
goes back to that margin. So you've got to build that in because I think health insurance is probably the biggest challenge for people wanting to retire early. And you've got to build it into your model. So right now I'm kind of getting a pass, but I know in a year to 2 years when she does want to step away, because we just had our first grandchild, that we are going to have to buy it on the open market and it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah. So let's say 2,500 times 12. And then if you like 4% rule that, that's $750,000 that you need
Hmm.
to have invested to take 4% and put it
Yeah.
towards literally your health insurance. Anybody
Yeah.
that's not listening in the United States that has like health insurance, they are
Mhm.
like laughing at us right now.
Mhm.
But just a reality of living in this country and retiring in this
Yeah.
country. And so just something that
Mhm.
everybody needs to be thinking about. So I definitely
Yeah.
wanted to ask that.
Yeah. Good question. A
So is there
very
anything
common question. The
Yeah,
health
exactly.
insurance.
Well, is there anything else you want to add, Andy, before we wrap up?
Uh, Not really. I know a common question that I know Dave Ramsey asked and a lot of podcasters ask is there any regrets that you have? I know that you put that in some of the notes, and I don't have any really regrets other than we did talk about how I was bulldozing into my IRA, and at some point I probably should have said, "Hey, at 35 or 40, this is going to be more than enough," and back off. But life was just busy for me. But I'd say the one regret is Roth IRAs did not exist when I started in this game. I think they came into existence in the later 90s.
Yeah.
And if I could go back in time, I would have done more Roth because the thought of being able to pull money out in 6 years for me, I'm 6 years away from 59 and a half, tax free that is amazing. So
Yeah.
if I could go back in time, I think Roth, and I've got a 23-year-old. She just started in the real world, and believe it or not, she gets an 11% match at her job. It blows people away.
Wow.
She's 23 and she's putting in over 1,000 a month at 23 into our IRA. But I had her put it in Roth, but there is a max in Roth, so we're having to deal with that. That she's going to have to make some pivots here because you can only put so much. But going back in time, I think I would have done Roth IRA
Yep.
investing.
Yeah, there's a Roth 401k now too, which has
Okay.
the higher. limit, but that didn't exist. You want to talk about something that didn't even
Yep.
exist when I started in the workforce,
Hmm.
however long, 12 years ago or whenever
Yeah.
that was.
Hmm.
Yeah, I didn't ask the regrets question. I figured
Yeah.
I should have because you still had a good answer. But I thought you said a few times, like, I don't regret paying off my house and I'm going to have
Right.
money in retirement
And
and
I
it's
don't say,
okay. And,
yeah, I have very few, but Roth, I think about Roth often because
okay,
people
that's
bring that
good.
up when I just have discussions with them.
Yep.
But no,
Yep.
I got
That's
nothing
good.
else. I just hope that, me sharing this podcast with people can help them. Uh, and the one thing I definitely want to bring up that there's no way I can end this podcast without bringing this up is life insurance, because I
Mm,
did have my first wife got
yeah.
diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009 when she was 37. And
Okay.
fortunately, in 2007, 2 years before her diagnosis, I do have a financial planner. There's a big debate whether you should have one or not. I've had one since I was broke, and he was broke, and now we're not broke anymore, but I still trust him. Trusted guy. We sat down when I changed jobs in 2007 and did a life analysis, and he saw there was a gap in the life insurance. I was 30, would have been 35 or 6 at the time, and we filled that gap with me and my wife and the whole, family picture. And we had no idea that 2 years later she'd be diagnosed with this disease. So when she passed in 13, I had life insurance on her. So it definitely helped ease the stress that I had of having an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old at 43 years old by myself. So definitely, and there's debates of term and whole. I personally had term.
Yep.
It was literally probably $35 a month. It was very cheap. So if you're young and you have families, definitely on your own, or if you have a planner, investigate life insurance. It's worth having, even if you don't need it.
Was your wife working at the time?
No, she was working. She worked full time. We had our first child in 2001, and she was a nurse, and she went very, very part time. Then we had her second child in 2003. She worked very minimal just to keep her
Hmm.
nursing certification, but pretty much was not working, but enough just to keep active. And then when she got diagnosed in '09, all kind of working stopped.
Of
Yes,
course.
completely stopped.
Well, I think that's important because a lot of people just think about, do I need to replace this person's income?
Hmm.
But like you said, then you needed a nanny, help around the house. Like
Yes. Yeah.
there's an economic value to that a lot of people ignore. And
Yeah.
it's not just, and a lot of people, it's like, well, I'll just do enough to pay off my mortgage. And that's, I
Yeah.
guess, one way you could look at it because you can free up some
Hmm.
money that way too.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask because even if someone isn't working, that does not mean that they don't need life insurance.
Correct. Yep. It's just I always, whenever I have discussions with people, I always bring that up because I think a lot of people do, some don't. There's debates, but if they walk away from the podcast and you don't have it, at least investigate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Well, why don't you let people know how to get in touch with you and follow you, Andy?
Yeah, sure. Yep. So we met through, I call it Twitter. I'll probably call it Twitter forever. It's X.
Me too.
We met there. So my moniker on X is at Millionaire Door, just like it sounds. And the reason it's at Millionaire Door is because my first moniker on Twitter was a millionaire next door. So that's what they gave me. I'm millionaire financial coach now, but at Millionaire Door. I do have a Facebook, and it's at a millionaire next door on Facebook. I'm not active there. I did a lot of work on it years ago, so there's good content there, but I'm not active there. And I do have a website. It's millionairefinancialcoach.com because I do some coaching, but I just want to warn people you could, if I've got maybe a 6 month queue to even talk to you for 10 minutes. So I'm not taking clients, but you could at least see what I do there. And just today, I launched a new website, and I got to see what we called this website. It's called Elite EliteOptionsAcademy.com. EliteOptionsAcademy.com. And I've partnered up with the guys from Cashflow University who I've met on Twitter, and we talked about I've got a 6-figure income now through options, and those guys have been very helpful. So just partnered up with those guys. But another website, if people are interested in options, we didn't really talk about it, but yeah. So those are ways,
Yep.
but I would say X is the best way if you want to see. I don't tweet as much as most people because I'm busier than I should be, but a great way to connect with me on X.
Yep. Very good friends with the CFU guys. All right. And I'll
Oh
put
yeah,
all of
yeah.
that in the show notes as well. Guys, you
Okay.
can follow me on Twitter X at Adulting is Easy. Instagram, Adulting is Easy Real. YouTube, this will be at Adulting is Easy. If you like this episode, you also like episode 167, Wealth Blueprint, using your 9 to 5 to buy assets and retire early, or possibly 173, which is about passive income streams. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Hopefully, Andy and I have made adulting a little easier for you.